Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating piece of research by Jeremy Nemeth titled Conflict, Exclusion, Relocation, Skateboarding, and Public Space. We're going to look at a local battle over a single public plaza, Philadelphia's famous Love Park, and see how it totally exposes the hidden economic and political forces that shape our cities. Honestly, it's an incredible story, and it forces us to ask some pretty hard questions about who actually owns the spaces we share. To really set the stage, we have to look at how city officials initially framed this whole issue. Back in the early 2000s, figures like Common Pleas Court Judge Richard B. Kline were publicly claiming that skateboarders were pushing the, quote, average person out of Philadelphia's public spaces. Skaters were essentially labeled as unruly, dangerous, and a direct threat to public order. But when a judge says the average person is being excluded, it really makes you pause, right? Because it begs the question, how exactly are we defining the average citizen? And maybe, even more importantly, who gets the power to make that choice? Because as we'll see, the teenagers who are hanging out and using that park, they were everyday citizens too.
To understand how this happened, let's look at the actual space. This is John F. Kennedy Plaza, though pretty much everyone affectionately calls it Love Park because of that iconic Robert Indiana sculpture sitting right in the middle. It was originally designed back in the 1950s by a city planner named Edmund. This curving granite plaza, sitting right across from City Hall, was meant to be the absolute civic keystone of downtown Philly. A place for relaxation, rallies, and civic events.
But here's the thing. Cities are living, breathing things, and spaces almost never get used exactly the way they were intended. By the mid-1990s, teenagers had completely transformed the space. With all that curving granite and flat marble, it accidentally became an internationally famous natural skateboard park. People actually called it the mecca of street skateboarding. It became this magnetic spot that drew youth from wealthy suburbs and the inner city alike, bringing wildly diverse groups together in a way that very few other spaces ever managed to do. Local professional skater Stevie Williams talked about this in interviews, noting just how incredibly vibrant the park was. Sure, there were occasional tensions between different cliques, but the park provided this super rare, unsupervised stage for diverse kids to just mingle, build their own identities, and learn complex skills from one another. It was a space of genuine, organic social interaction, completely free from adult regulation.
All right, moving into Section 1, the X Games Paradox. This brings us to a really incredible mystery of political hypocrisy pointed out in the research. $80 million. That's a massive number, right? Well, that is the total revenue generated when Philadelphia proudly hosted the ESPN X Games in 2001 and 2002. And ESPN officials were totally upfront about it. They explicitly stated they chose Philadelphia precisely because Love Park was globally famous in the skateboarding world. So the city was actively and heavily marketing the exact same counterculture they had spent years trying to suppress.
But the second the cameras packed up and left, the city's attitude completely flipped. Just months after raking in millions from this global spotlight on extreme sports, the city aggressively enforced a total ban on skateboarding. We're talking $300 citations, with officials citing property damage as the main reason. Pro skater Bam Margera famously hit the nail on the head when he pointed out the irony. One day, the city was literally clapping for the skaters, and the next day, they were criminalizing them for the exact same activity. The physical transformation of the space really tells the whole story here. Check out the contrast. The city claimed that skaters had caused $60,000 in damage to the stone ledges. But what was their solution? They turned around and spent a staggering $800,000 on a massive redesign. They added pink planters and these crossbar benches that were specifically engineered to make the park completely unskateable. They quite literally engineered the play right out of the plaza. And here is the crucial takeaway. The whole argument about property damage doesn't really hold up. The skateboarding company DC Shoes stepped in and actually offered a massive corporate donation, $1 million over 10 years, to cover absolutely all the damages and even pay for a park monitor so kids could still skate in a limited way. The city completely refused it. So if they're rejecting a $1 million offer that perfectly solves their stated problem, the research suggests their true motives clearly lay somewhere else. Which perfectly leads us into Section 2, gentrification and public space. To get to the bottom of those true motives, Nemeth's research zooms out to look at the broader economic restructuring happening in Center City, Philadelphia at the time. He breaks it down using two academic concepts, exchange value versus use value. Basically, modern cities heavily prioritize exchange value. They want citizens who act as consumers, people buying lattes, shopping, and driving commerce. On the flip side, the spontaneous, unprogrammed play of teenagers just hanging out and practicing tricks, that represents pure use value. And to city managers who are desperately trying to revitalize the local economy, that non-commercial activity just looks like irrational, unprofitable disorder.
See, Philadelphia was in this intense race to attract corporate capital and wealthy new residents, aiming to add over 13,000 new people to the downtown area. To pull this off, they formed business improvement districts to mandate these heavily regulated, safe, clean, and attractive corporate zones. Within that aggressively sanitized vision of the city, skater culture wasn't viewed as a vibrant public asset. Instead, it was framed as a polluting presence, a completely unpredictable threat to downtown property values that simply had to go.
As you might guess, this extreme sterilization was wildly controversial and sparked massive public protests. It got so heated that Love Park's original planner, the 92-year-old Edmund, actually showed up and defiantly rode a skateboard across the plaza in a show of solidarity with the kids. He argued that these teenagers had creatively activated the space in a way the original designers couldn't have even dreamed of.
So how did the city react to all this? Let's look at Section 3, the relocation strategy.
To handle the massive public backlash, the city turned to a classic and honestly very subtle tool of urban control. Nemeth defines this as exclusion by relocation. It's a strategy where officials pacify public anger by taking an undesirable group out of a highly visible civic center and hiding them away in a peripheral, purpose-built zone. So by pushing the skaters out of the visible heart of the city, officials effectively silence them, while simultaneously patting themselves on the back, claiming they were actually accommodating the skaters' needs.
The reality of this relocation strategy is pretty stark when you look at it. The city donated land for a brand new privately funded skate park on the banks of the Schuylkill River. But what's the catch? Well, it was over a mile away from Love Park. It was intentionally tucked far out of sight from all the downtown businesses, wealthy residents, and tourists.
And if you look at the stark differences between these two types of spaces, it's pretty eye-opening. A natural urban plaza like Love Park is central, spontaneous, and totally free from corporate branding. Navigating it actually forces kids to develop mapping skills and urban literacy. But a purpose-built skate park, it's peripheral, it's hidden out of sight, heavily regulated, and completely reliant on private or corporate funding just to exist. Ultimately, it dictates exactly how, where, and when youth are allowed to play.
Which brings us to our fourth and final section, who owns the city?
Ultimately, this explainer isn't just about a ban on skateboards or a few chipped granite ledges. It's really about citizenship, representation, and the fundamental right to exist in the public sphere, especially for young people who don't necessarily hold a lot of economic power. The research highlights that truly open-minded public spaces require us to confront social differences head-on. A genuinely healthy city forces us to share space with people who aren't exactly like us, rather than artificially purifying the streets just to maximize the comfort of the most privileged classes.
The skaters' ongoing fight for Love Park serves as a really powerful reminder that the meaning of our urban spaces isn't just set in stone. It's constantly being contested, negotiated, and rewritten by the everyday people who actually use them. Claiming your right to the city means you can never, ever take that right for granted. Which leaves us with one final, crucial question to think about the next time you walk through your own downtown or sit in a beautifully manicured public plaza. Who is your city's public space really designed for? And perhaps more importantly, who has been quietly erased from the picture to make it look that way? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep looking closely at the invisible rules all around you.